Hi, and welcome to my channel, Laura's Library Card. So today I'm doing a book review on Desperate Measures by Katie Robert, and I had a lot of feels right when I first finished, so I vlogged a little segment about those feelings, and so I'm going to put that here, and then the second half of the video is going to be my review, and my review for the first bit will just sort of be my review, general, and then the second half I might get into some spoilers, so I will warn you before that happens. Here's my emotions card. So I'm just quickly jumping on and filming this vlog because I just finished the book Desperate Measures by Katie Robert, and I wanted to get my reaction out while it was still pretty fresh. I had a lot of reactions. I first heard about this book on a vlog from Chelsea Dowling Reads, and it was just something that she read. And she was planning on rereading it because she just purchased the second and third book in the series. So she says, oh, it's a Jasmine and Jafar sexy book. And I'm like, okay. And I was a little unsure about how I felt about that, but I immediately went and checked it out from the library. So yeah, I'm still not sure how I feel about that. I felt like my reactions for most of the book were sort of like cringe and a lot of confusion, honestly. So the book is set not in Agrabah and not in some unclear time period in history, but it's essentially contemporary, and it's in this like the author has sort of made her own like a little universe. And so Jafar, it's set up right at the start that like Jafar is staging a coup and overthrowing Jasmine's father. And in this book, Jasmine's father is like a bad guy. Like he was basically this like crime lord who like beat Jasmine, and she's never left her father's like grand estate, and she was sort of spoiled, but at the same time, like he did not treat her with any respect. He just valued her for her, you know, trade ability and what sort of profit he could make on her. And so like literally the opening page is there's somebody in my room, and I'm like, okay, we're starting this off with like a little bit of like a thriller vibe. And Jasmine grabs her letter opener and like threatens to cut the guy's no, she does, she threatens to cut the guy's balls off. And it's Jafar, and he's like, I'll give you a choice, like you can either run or, you know, give in. And she's like, heck no. And then it makes reference like within the first 3 pages of like her safe word, which is Raja. And I'm thinking, safe word? What's going on? We are thrown right into the midst of this action scene, not getting any sort of background, but I'm like, do these two people have a relationship that's already established? What's going on? And so he says, if you can make it to the front door and get out, like you can walk off scot-free. If not, I own you, body and soul. And I'm like, okay. And so he reminds her of her safe word, and she decides not to use it. And so she goes running out the front door, or running for the front door. And he catches her, and I don't really feel like this is much of a spoiler because this is all happening in the first 30, 40 pages. He catches her. She is verbally saying, no, I don't want this. Stop. No, stop. And he is like, well, you didn't make it to the front door. And he proceeds to initiate sex in a very, very, very rapey kind of way. And yet the whole time it's from Jasmine's perspective. So it's like she, in her head, is saying, she's verbally saying, I don't want this. But in her head, she's like, oh, I'm like kind of wanting this. And so I, as the reader, am sitting there being like, so is he raping her? Like, what is happening? And because they already made reference to this like safe word situation, I was like, okay, so is this like a scene? Because like she's getting off, and so was he. And I kind of felt like that for a lot of the book. I was very conflicted as to what was happening. And I don't know if I have enough to talk about in this book to really do a full review, but I definitely had a lot of feelings. And it sort of for the rest of the book, like, you know, because Jasmine didn't make it to the front door, she sort of belongs to Jafar. He takes her to his penthouse, and it's basically trading, she views it as trading one cage for a different cage, even though both cages are gilded, and she, is being well treated physically. I can't even for sure say that. There's definitely a lot of like dominant submissive themes in this book, which I have not that much experience with. It's 50 Shades. I probably should like do some research or something if I have anything to say about that. But yeah, there's a lot of sex. A lot of it is very unclear on how much consent there's going on, and that's because one of the things that like Jasmine enjoys is like being forced. And so, Jafar does kind of constantly remind her of her safe word, but like and he's her dominant and he wants her to be submissive, but it's very like Christian and Anastasia's vibes, because he enjoys when she's rebellious. He enjoys like her, pushing those boundaries. He says at one point he doesn't want to break her spirit, but he like wants her submissive. So it's sort of, I'm getting those vibes where Christian was like, yeah, I'm really like, I want you to be my submissive, but at the same time, like, you're pushing my buttons and I like it. So like keep walking this line that doesn't exist. So there was a lot of sex. It wasn't really the kind that I was super into, because it was so forced, and the like lines for me on like consent were not clear, which is what was sort of making me uncomfortable. And also there's definitely like daddy baby girl comments, which personally don't do it for me. I mean, whatever, to consenting adults, you do you. But for me, it was just kind of like, ooh, not my thing. So I had a lot of feels. I spent a lot, like Jasmine is constantly throughout the whole book going like, oh, but I could love him. And then she's like, but I shouldn't. And she's like, but our sex is great, but like he's trapping me. And so she's very all over the place. And Jafar sort of we get a little bit less of his perspective. I'd say it's more like 60-40. But he sort of is like, oh, I took Jasmine because I wanted her. And even though she was part of the like power play that he was making for Jasmine's father's like empire or whatever. And Aladdin / Ali is in this book, but he's a bad guy in this book. So overall, there was a lot going on. And I had a lot of feels about it, and most of them were like kind of negative, or confusion, or like, ooh, not my thing. But there was just enough going on in this book that I was kind of like, what's happening? So I'm not sure if I want to read the next books in the series, but I don't know. I might like start it and then like do not finish if I'm really hating it. So I just wanted to pop on and get out some of my feels. And okay, so my book review. So to me, this blurb sort of indicates that it's going to be a romance, and I looked up the difference between like romance and erotica, and essentially a romance is a story about a couple that has some sort of like resolution. Usually it's a happy ever after. And the point of the story is that it's a story about the couple. It's their relationship. It's them working towards being together. Whereas erotica is scenes of sexual titillation, which I thought was hilarious. But maybe there's a story that sort of strings those scenes together, but it's the point is not to have sort of like a resolution or have the couple get together in the end necessarily. Sometimes it's like a character sort of using sex to grow and explore who they are as themselves. And obviously there can be a lot of overlap in like an erotic romance where there is erotic sex scenes in a romance story, but it's still, in that case, if there's a story where there's a couple and the couple grows together and they end up together in the end, it's still a romance. It's just the amount of the like sexual titillation changes whether or not it's like an erotic romance. So I guess by those definitions, technically this book is an erotic romance, because like Jafar and Jasmine choose to be together in the end, and they seem happy about that, and they both claim to be in love. There's not really that much more that I can say about the summary, so I'm going to move on to like characters, plot, and aesthetics. So actually aesthetics is probably the easiest and shortest to mention. This doesn't actually take place in Agrabah or like a Disney city or place that I know of. It's contemporary, there's cars, there's cell phones, there are sex dungeons, and there's really not that much like atmosphere. We see Jasmine's bedroom in her like estate, her father's estate where she grew up, and we see this like sex dungeon in the city that Hades runs called the Underworld. And we see Jasmine in Jafar's penthouse, and like that's sort of it. So the aesthetics of the world like sort of don't really exist for me. So as for characters, the story is told mostly from Jasmine and Jafar's point of views. I would say it's not quite evenly split, more Jasmine like 60%, Jafar 40%. But from Jasmine's point of view, she is very like conflicted and complicated and growing as a person, but doesn't really get very far, I would say, in this book. I don't know, Jasmine, like in certain moments she was all feisty and she was defying Jafar, and she was like doing a major like F you Jafar to like what you've done to me and the situation I'm in. But then at the same time, internally, she's very like scared and conflicted and naive, and she's very like self-aware and practical about how much she really knows, because she's never really left her father's estate. And so she's practical about her freedom. She's like, where would I go? Like, I don't have any money. I don't know how. I've never got a job. I don't know how to drive. Like, she's very practical with those regards. And so about sex, she also feels really conflicted. She feels a lot of shame and a lot of I should about how she should feel, because she's sexually aroused by like force or bondage, the idea of, exhibitionism. All of those things are things that she is sexually interested in, but at the same time she feels a lot of guilt and shame about like wanting those. And like multiple times she kind of chastises herself. She's like, oh, good girls wouldn't want this. Well, I need to turn those thoughts off. So it's like she's trying to be strong, but she's still like struggling with that message a lot. And she's really conflicted because she's sort of interested in Jafar, both sexually and as like a person, but she also hates him for the fact that he has not given her a choice in what has happened to her, and he has sort of confined her to his penthouse and has taken away a lot of her freedoms. But like she like wants to be with Jafar, but at the same time she like feels guilty about like developing feelings for this guy who has done these things to her and that she shouldn't have feelings for. Jafar is obviously the other main character, and he is like 100% about control. He displays outwardly a very cool, calm facade, very in control. He constantly feels like he has to be in charge of every situation. And he is very upfront about like, I want you submissive and I want you under my control. And part of that is because he's just taken over like her father's estate and like business or whatever. And so being in charge of Jasmine and sort of like putting her in this submissive, like literally wearing a collar, that he kind of wants that. That would be a demonstration of his power, a demonstration that he has taken control over not just Jasmine's father's like estate and business, but like his daughter too. Like he's like a conqueror. But at the same time, he like doesn't want to degrade Jasmine. He wants her to voluntarily choose to belong to him. So for me, we don't really see much else from Jafar. And I felt like him like realizing that he was in love with Jasmine was like really abrupt. Like the plot to me was really confusing because there really like wasn't that much plot. There was a lot of very unclear, to me, this specific reader, like what sort of consent lines were happening. I felt like there wasn't consensual acts happening here. Like she was verbally saying like, no, don't, stop, I don't want this. And like every time he was just like, oh, but you do. And then like proceeded to do the thing. And I'm like, but she just said no. So that's like not consenting. So I was not super comfortable reading that. And like that's sort of a main theme throughout the whole book is that like one of the things that Jasmine is interested in, like sexually, is that she wants to be forced. And so she, like, Jafar has to constantly be like, hey, like, you have the safe word. So, like, if you say no, like, I'm not going to take that as a no. But because that's not laid out, it wasn't laid out that clearly to me at the start. So I thought the whole, like, first 20, 50 pages, I don't know how long it was like a rape. And I was like, this is not what I want to be reading. I just sort of most of the time like felt uncomfortable, and then I had to keep reminding myself like toward like later in the book, like, okay, like this is what she really wants, and like she has a safe word and they've talked about this, but that was not established at the start. So yeah, for the most part, like Jafar like conquers Jasmine's father's holdings, and then he takes Jasmine to his penthouse, and so she sort of trades like one gilded cage for another gilded cage, and so her focus is getting her freedom throughout the whole book. And Jafar, like, he's actually not in a lot of scenes because he just like leaves Jasmine and he's like, I gotta go do some business. When he does come back, he takes her to a sex dungeon, which is what Hades runs. And partially that's sort of like a control thing, a demonstration of like his power over Jasmine. But also sort of like Hades is the guy you like make deals with. And so I'm like, is there a deal happening here? What's happening? There is some sort of plot with Ali, but like, I just felt like most of this book, I was kind of confused as to what was happening. I felt like the sex was very explicit and gratuitous, and I thought that I had read a lot of gratuitous explicit sex before, but like none of this was doing it for me. So overall, I think I only rated it like a 2, just because I had a lot of issues with the sex part, and with the like consent part, and the fact that I didn't really feel like Jasmine or Jafar really like changed that much. I didn't feel like they like had time together to like fall in love. I just felt like it was like an erotica that like had like a really crummy like romance, like very loosely tying it together. So first, a very brief little spoiler section. Spoilers are gonna start now. So like sort of like the main like plot of the book, other than the two of them falling for each other, is Ali feels cheated that Jasmine like escaped his clutches and got out of this arranged marriage contract. So he is trying to get Jasmine back, and it's partially like a FU to Jafar, but also like he feels like he's owed, you know, he feels like he bought Jasmine and should get what he paid for. So the plot that happens is like Jasmine is stuck in Jafar's penthouse. She tries to make friends with Tink, who's like a clothing person. Tink's like, yeah, no, sorry. Like, I know who's paying my bills and like whose side to be on, essentially. And she doesn't really offer any help. And then, so partway through the book, like right when Jasmine's realizing that she has feelings for Jafar, she tries to get him to like share his plan with her. And when he doesn't, she views that as a sign that he doesn't really care for her the way that she cares for him. So when Jasmine goes to the underworld, she meets Megara, who's like Hades' right-hand man. And ultimately, like, there's like this whole sex scene with Jasmine and Jafar and Megara, and I was like, what is the point of this other than to like just be gratuitous sex? But ultimately Meg helps Jasmine escape. So in the end, she like takes Meg and Hades' like deal, but then it turns out that wasn't really a deal because they just take her straight to Ali, who very clearly had made a deal with Hades. And Ali actually takes Jasmine like back to the estate where she grew up, and Jasmine is like realizing that he like smacks her or something, you know, he hits her or something, and Jasmine realizes she has to get out. Like she's just, again, she's like back in another gilded cage. So she actually ends up, like I said, spoiler alert, slitting Ali's throat. Like she's like pretends to be all like, oh, you're my new husband. And then she's like, and she kills him. And so she's like literally drenched in his blood. And she like turns to, the guards who are there. And she's like, so, I'm your new queen. Are you going to follow me or what? And so like when one guard does, like all the rest kind of fall in line and they're like, damn, okay. So then when Jafar shows up, because he's like, oh no, Ali has Jasmine, like I better go rescue her, and I'm realizing that I love her. And then he gets to, her house and where she's just like killed Ali and all the guards are now working for her. And he's like, okay, I love her. Even though I've been trying to get power this entire book and like control is like super important to me, like I would rather like be her partner and like get the girl and get the estate and power and whatever, than just like be like, no, I don't want you because I want the control, and then it would be a fight against her. So he just kind of like realizes that, and the book just basically tells you that, like there's no like the reader figuring it out for themselves or anything. It's just like Jafar thought blah, and I was like, okay, we're just being told, we're not being like shown stuff. And so the book ends with the two of them being like, well, I love you and I love you too, and like now we're gonna be crime lords together. So that was my very rambly book review of Desperate Measures by Katie Robert, and I will let you know if I decide to continue the series. Otherwise, thanks for listening. Bye.